Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy 2025. Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting, amazing episode of Tavora Talks. I am your host, Cash, and joined by my colleague and co-host and partner in cybercrime, Mr. Clayton Rines. Happy New Year, Clayton. We're a little bit past Happy New Year, I guess, but how are you? How's it
Yeah,
going?
doing well. Doing well. Good to be back on the show.
Indeed, indeed. Good to be back. We got a little bit of a kickstart to our year. Finally have some time to get in and update our fine viewers on what's happening in the cyber world. But I have some cool things I wanted to talk about. I know there's a couple hot topics that's on everybody's mind that you wanted to dive into, but I thought maybe let's just dive into it. Um, I think maybe a little bit of a recap, right? What happened last year? A lot happened last year, of course. Advent of AI. AI is getting a little bit more easily accessible. It's getting more powerful. Of course, AI is becoming a weapon, right? Weapon in the cyber side of in that attack at the hands of the attackers. It's becoming a tool on the counter side, right? For all of its defenders. CrowdStrike getting more advanced, all these other cyber tools getting more advanced. But 2024, Clayton, I don't know if you know this, but I had an uptick in the number of actively exploited CVEs. So in 2024, there were a total of 768 CVEs exploited, which is a approximately 20% increase from 639 CVs exploited actively in 2023. So a little bit of an uptick there, right? And I don't know about you, but the more and more AI gets powerful, the more and more it becomes readily accessible. I can just assume and expect this number of actively exploitable CVEs to increase just by the sheer nature of the number of CVEs is going to increase, I would imagine. Well, what do you think? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, key thing that strikes me there is exploited, right? There's always a lot of hyperventilating over number of CVEs and what's actually critical and what's not, and what's the context for your particular organization. Is this actually exploitable in practice? But if it's been exploited, that always raises things up as something interesting, right? I mean, even on pen tests, you could have a medium, on the CVE rating, but if it gets exploited, it could lead to a very interesting attack chain that's critical for you, right? So even though a medium is a medium, once exploited, could be very much damaging. So it's always good to put that into context. That's what I think is interesting here is we're seeing an uptick in exploited vulnerabilities. I mean, I always like that you bring these up because it's good to square this with what we've always heard in the past. Everyone's talking about number of vulnerabilities is going to increase. Cybersecurity spend's got to increase to match that, et cetera, right? But we're actually seeing this, every year it actually does increase. Number of
Yeah,
vulnerabilities, number of exploits does increase, and it is increasing. It's always something to be mindful of. It's not just marketing fluff there, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And it's like in the past years, a lot of these exploits are like manually found, right? Through manual testing, manual research by all these cyber firms, cyber researchers, of course, on both sides of the fence, right? Both on the attacker side and on the anti-attacker side. But yeah, that number that I just presented was approximately 1% of the total CVEs that were found in 2024. So right? That makes
Yeah.
sense. I don't know if it's exact linear correlation, can't put that term on it, of course, but it just makes sense. It's a numbers game. The more CVEs found, the more that can be actively
Yeah.
exploited, and AI is not going to help the cause. But
We had some critical iOS ones, some critical Microsoft ones. I mean, the ones that come to mind are the ones that were really bad. We're still getting, very, very difficult to determine and fix sort of exploits, even at the high levels on very mature products, which is always alarming, I think.
indeed, and AI, speaking of AI, it's getting advanced, right? So there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and how I'll kind of shed this on you, which I found to be pretty cool. So there's a company called SE Labs. Have you heard of SE Labs?
Yeah.
So SE Labs, for those who maybe not aware, they do a lot of testing, right? Testing of cybersecurity tools, just kind of third-party evaluation, et cetera. And they're themselves certified to the teeth on pretty much every compliance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So pretty validated company to do some of this testing, and they recently gave CrowdStrike 100% score in detection, 100% score in protection, and 100% accuracy in detecting and preventing various types of ransomware, which that's pretty cool.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've always been a pretty big fan of CrowdStrike just because it's, for active threats, it's good, right? You can help detect an active threat without needing to kind of do any kind of system reboot, etc. So we use it ourselves for helping find root cause. But that's pretty awesome, right? 100% seems
100% is
rather
good. Yeah.
promising.
I
But
mean, yeah, we use CrowdStrike tools internally. Always worked very well. Unexpected outages notwithstanding. But it's yeah, it's always been a good product that's worked well, and we see it a lot on pen tests, as you can imagine, as well as several others on the endpoint. But uh, I'm glad we're getting closer to sort of malware. It says detection. It would be great if it was prevention. I mean, even when we're doing purple teams, shoot, there's only half a dozen things that ransomware can actually do and actually does on the endpoint. And we can control those in a pretty succinct way. You should be able to detect those, I think, in 2025. That's what the hope is. So, and some of this too is interesting because they're doing their own independent testing. SE Labs is, but I mean, folks should do their own testing. I can't tell you how many places we walk into, and they have these controls in place, cybersecurity controls of any kind, including on the endpoint, that simply don't get tested. It just gets deployed, and they're like, well, yep, when there's an alert, we're going to address it. But there's really never any effort or project or team that's attacking it to see, okay, what are you actually preventing? If it doesn't prevent these things, is it detecting them? And is it detecting them in a way where the first responders are going to know what to actually look at when they see these alerts? All three of those things have to align. You can't just deploy tech on the endpoint, have a professional services firm configure it, and hope for the best. It has to be validated. And it's great that even independent labs are going through and helping validate some of these use cases because, again, in the field, they're really not touched as thoroughly as I think they should be.
I agree. I agree. And it's like, it's a very common, practice, right? We put so much trust in our tools that we're like, oh, we got the tool. It's okay. And I've, walked into so many environments that, post attack, they always have these kind of comments like, oh, we have this tool. And then come a couple months later, that tool was maybe the compromise um,
Yeah.
vector, right? Because just downstream effects, like SolarWinds a couple years back, that had the downstream effect. CrowdStrike, that was a kind of goof up on them, honestly. Earlier last year, where pretty much half the Windows machines in the world got shut down. They
Yeah.
recovered from that. That was a goof up, coding goof up on their end. But nonetheless, yeah, you're right, right? Just because you roll it out, I mean, at least try to poke at it, try to break it, make sure it's working the way you hope that it will.
Yeah, I would think some of these implementations are so difficult in large orgs that the last thing you want to do is like, okay, let's blow it up and test it, you know? They're like, well, we just got finished implementing it and we got through all of these contingencies and all these use cases and exceptions. And the last thing we want to do is now poke holes in what we finally got working. But it's important, I think, to get through that mindset. And yes, once you're done implementing and all the use cases have passed UAT, you've gone through all your change control, you still need to test at the end, right? You got to be able to do that last step.
Absolutely. And if you don't have a good, robust team to do testing, fortunately here at Tavora, here's a shameless plug for you.
Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
we have a lot of good teams, and we're kind of. I'm glad you brought up testing. I don't know if it's by intent or whatnot, but our threat team internally, probably top of the best, some of the best guys we have in the game, I would want to say, but they set off CrowdStrike alarms all the time, right? And that's good because at least I know the tool is doing what it did. Because if they weren't setting alarms off, then I'd be a little concerned. But majority of our alerts come from our own internal threat group, just doing what they do best. But
Yeah, very true.
that said, speaking of validation, Microsoft, right? Microsoft is always leveraged and is always the center of things, usually attack, right? But this is an interesting one, not to their fault, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe it's on them to scrape the web and make sure things that are saying they're Microsoft are actually them. So this is a new style. Attackers are leveraging Google Ads. advertising Microsoft products, right? They pretty much rip the exact same looking page as Microsoft's page, but of course you can kind of get where I'm going at, right? The landing page is not actually Microsoft. People visit, they click on it, they try to get to the product to sign up, but then lo and behold, it's an attacker's site, and of course, a lot of things lurking around the corner there. So I found that interesting. I'm not
Hmm.
sure how long that's going to hold up, if Google's going to maybe take some part in validating who can just make an ad. Can anybody just go pretend to be any company and write an ad about that? I don't know.
It's interesting that these old methods are still viable. I mean, you can take the social engineering toolkit set, you can replicate a site that has a login page that looks legit, and you can run fake Google ads to direct people to that site. I mean, the fact that you can still do that in 2025 is pretty amazing, I think. And I think it just underscores that, nothing is sort of off the table when it comes to attack methods. You still got to cover all of your bases, even if it's a 20-year-old method, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Sometimes it's always everybody gets so advanced and starting to think about the more advanced and advanced techniques, maybe lose focus on some of the basic ones, right? How easy is it to just do that? And I mean, kind of building on that, another attack that I've seen is attackers are they this was a recent one where they targeted a bunch of news reporters and journalists, right? They're sending these PDF documents, of course, heavily crafted, specially crafted PDFs via WhatsApp to these, journalists' phone numbers, and there you go. That's it. They get compromised,
Yeah.
right? Look, one click later on a WhatsApp PDF that comes your way. Who's going to think twice about that, right? But yeah, it's a evolving world, forever evolving, but at the same time using old tools.
I feel like everyone's sneakier, right, as ever, but the methods aren't necessarily that advanced. I mean, how many incidences have we been on where you see some really bespoke 0 day for a proprietary platform that gets exposed and something, really, really like Mission Impossible spy game sort of scenario? Almost never, right? It's always something much more mundane than that.
Oh yeah.
And that's always what we advocate, right? You got to raise the floor. You're not looking to raise the roof on your capabilities. Like work on all the fundamental stuff because it's always those exceptions to your password policy. The one system that doesn't get patched, the one executive that has the exception to the, endpoint security rule. It's always those fringe, those edge use cases that really get you burned, right? And it's always something mostly not very sophisticated.
It mostly isn't. And I was on a couple recent ones. One of them, it was help desk impersonation, right? They called a couple users, a couple of them actually went along with it. And it's again numbers game, right? You just do the same thing on 50 internal employees. One of them will bite. And they did, right? They're like, oh, okay, IT, you need to get on my computer. Sure. I'll install what do they use? I think on that, I don't know, one of these team viewer equivalents,
Yeah.
right? it, there's many of these remote tools, but and then it was pretty straightforward. Um, yeah, you're on the computer, then it's downhill from there. I feel like there's like small silver lining to just users being susceptible, right? Because it comes all the ways down to the end user, right? Maybe just
Yeah.
lack of security training, or they just forget, in the ski in heavy workload Monday morning, you're walking into the office with 60 emails sitting there, etc. I mean, I get it, right? I mean, we're all human at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how much security training you get, but if it looks like an urgent email, you're already in a panic, then it's like an easy click away. But nonetheless,
Hmm.
keeps evolving. And speaking of evolving, I think there's something that you wanted to mention. What was the topic that you kind of brought up to me a little bit ago?
Yeah, the guys at Wiz published something that their researchers had found in the DeepSeek AI. Of course, DeepSeek was causing a lot of anxiety last week
Oh
uh,
yeah, big
in
topic.
being released, and there was a lot of tweets flying around about is this interesting from a security perspective? Maybe not. Maybe it's just
Sure.
this is the direction AI is taking. Maybe it's not going to be as expensive as it was projected to be. But what I liked about this Wiz article is they are looking at what we are looking at when we have customers that roll their own LLM, which is, are you exposing data through your LLM that you shouldn't be? Because here's the rub, right? I mean, you're basically training your AI on sensitive information. You want it to give good responses based on that very sensitive information, but not disclose the sensitive information
Mhm.
directly, right? So we want to be able to say train it on PII and patient information about treatment and treatment efficacy, for instance, but you don't want to obviously give specific patient information, right? But these is actually exactly what happened. The Wiz folks went in, took a look. They basically were enumerating, what URLs has this thing been trained on, and they were looking at non-standard HTTP ports, so not port 80 or 443. They
Oh,
found some
interesting.
interesting URLs, right, related to the ClickHouse database, which is done. It basically does analytics for and storage processing for web platforms, right? And they found sensitive information exposure. So they were able to say, hey, this is what this thing was trained on, or this is one of the sources it was trained on. We know how to enumerate the information in this data source directly. Let's see if the LLM will actually return this information to us. And it did. So obviously, huge information exposure problem. They did contact they did contact the authorities at DeepSeek, and they were able to remove that direct data exposure. But I think it raises an important question, like, okay, well, you removed the ability to retrieve it, but it was still trained on it. You didn't unlearn this information, so it's still there in
Right.
some way.
That's
It's a
right.
little uneasy, right? But I think it highlights a key issue, which is you got to test the front end on these devices, and we've actually done a fair amount of penetration testing recently on exactly this use case, right? Hey, you've got a private instance of ChatGPT that you rolled out for your enterprise. You trained it on your proprietary sensitive information. What can you actually retrieve through the front end through prompt engineering? So prompt engineering or prompt pen testing is becoming much bigger of an issue. And shoot, even professionally constructed AI LLMs are having this problem. I think your average Fortune 500 will certainly have a similar issue, I would think.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's still a query, right? At the end of the day, you're querying this tool, but its query language is not what everybody's used to, right? It's not like SQL query language or Falcon query language or Splunk's query language, right? It's just plain
Yeah.
American English lingo. But if you're good at it, you can get some good data out of these GPTs, right? So that's always definitely been a topic. And yeah, there's DeepSeek now. I don't know if you heard Alibaba has dropped theirs. I think in this race to win the bet, right? But theirs is called
Mhm.
Qwen 2.5, and these guys are claiming that they're better than DeepSeek. DeepSeek is claiming that it's faster than GPT, but where's the data going? Who's
Yeah.
housing it? Uh, every query that you put, it's like it's generative, right? By design, it's intended to learn off of
Yeah.
itself and constantly evolve. And any data you throw in there, just like what you said, it still goes somewhere. They don't purge it. And I wonder, I'm curious about that, Clay. Now that you brought it up, it's generally hard if something gets leaked on the internet, it's like good luck trying to scrub that, right? Once it's out there, it's out there. But I wonder the advent of this, generative AI systems, where where is that long-term data going? Can it be
Yeah.
scrubbed once it's in there? Does it replicate it across thousands of databases, or is it
Yeah.
easily trackable? Does it get a unique identifier every time it gets replicated? It's interesting, but
You know,
I would like
we
to hear
had
about that.
Jonathan Dam brought in the founder of Cranium. They do a lot of AI security work. Super smart guy. And one of the points he made was that it's really hard to basically unlearn something in your AI model, which definitely piqued my interest because apparently there's a way to do it, but it's sort of difficult and very costly and not likely to get done correctly. So once you basically tainted your data set with, or your AI by learning on a certain data set, it's created all this inference references and this derivative data, right? So you got a data set and then it creates its own data set based on that, right? All through all the inferences that I'm not an AI expert, but this is the abbreviation of that conversation. But basically that it's hard to unlearn things once they've been taught.
Yeah,
So the cautionary tale there was be very careful about what you train your AI model on. And if you can
100%.
anonymize your data, absolutely do so. If you don't need to retrieve the actual PII or other information that would be interesting, choose not to, because even if you cannot engineer a way to extract that information today, that derivative data is still there, could still be accessed through someone clever or in a hack or something else, right? And that's important to remember that these things aren't, while while your model may be a little bit of a black box to you, it's certainly something that could be gamed to extract information that you don't want it to divulge, right?
Absolutely. I think it might get better. I think the use case for these like, generally accessible AI platforms like GPT and Alibaba's version, etc. I know NVIDIA at their SEC conference, they're releasing a lot of very affordable hardware that's extremely powerful to put AI on. And I think the goal there is couple fold, right? Give availability to have people bring AI into their own environments in its own little sandbox, right? So it's your own AI. Data is not going outward, and you can bring multiple different models into that training system, right? So that I think has some potential, assuming that these things are fully sandboxable, right? Where they don't still need to phone home and ping some data out and resync or whatever. But I'm curious
Yeah.
to see how that folds. But one way to find out, the world will be evolving.
Yeah. What's
Well,
funny is that, all this AI talk, I thought, in some ways security was getting left behind, but here we are only, a year or so into or maybe 2 years into the AI hype, and security is becoming a central part of how these things are being deployed and used, which is interesting, I think.
oh yeah, I think some part of me, I think few years back when you're speaking about AI and cybersecurity, yeah, it's going to go a little bit in a direction where it's making our lives on the combating side better, with tools like CrowdStrike, for example, that are getting more advanced and being able to detect and prevent. But at the same time, it's getting more advanced on the other end as well, especially with computing power increasing significantly, getting cheaper, getting into the hands of the many. I can just only assume that we're going to start seeing more twists, more variations, more stories, and it's ever going to be
Yeah.
evolving. But job security, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah, exactly. I think whoever thinks it can predict the future on, AI usage in the enterprise today, I don't know that you can, honestly.
No,
So yeah, it'll be interesting.
I just use it for what it's good for, right? Like, is my grammar correct? Make some pointless, 5, 10 second reels with Sora just for funny.
Yeah, let's
Like,
be real. Some of you need to improve your grammar, so let's start there,
yeah,
right?
exactly. There, just keep it limited to that. But definitely don't dump your entire analysis report into there and say, can you improve upon my results? I don't think that's a good idea. Beyond that, 2025 is just beginning. We'll be excited to keep bringing you updates on how the landscape on the cyber realm keeps evolving. For this episode of Toward Talks, we'll kind of keep it short and sweet. And of course, I think AI is going to be a constant topic that we'll be talking about this year. Let's see what it unfolds. But that said, I don't have much more for today's episode. Mr. Rhinus, any last minute words for our fine audience out there?
No, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. Indeed, we'll be on it to keep you up to date, keep bringing you these episodes. And as we used to always say, if you figure out a way to get a hold of myself or Clayton, say hi. Um, we'll send you something. We'll send you a fun little swag bag from Tavora Talks. Beyond that, we are hoping to get to RSA this year. Of course, Black Cat every year is our forte, so we'll see some of you there. Beyond that, we'll be happy to hear about you. If there's any topic that you want us to talk about, please let us know. As always, like, subscribe, tell your friends. And I guess without more to talk about, we'll see you guys next time.